Three men in black jackets moved like shadows through the glass doors of the Leonard restaurant. Expensive crystal glittered waiters balanced trays, conversations drifted in low hums of power and money, but no one saw danger until it was already in the room. A billionaire CEO sat at his usual corner table sipping aged whiskey ready to close another deal. Then a fist crashed into his jaw. Wine glasses toppled and silver cutlery clattered against marble floors. 3 against 1. It should have been over in seconds, but from the back of the room a quiet man in a server's uniform stepped forward. His name was Ethan Cross, and what happened in the next 4 seconds stunned the world. Follow this story until the very end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I know how far this story has traveled. The attack began with eerie precision. The first man lunged across the linen-draped table, grabbing CEO Daniel Carter by the lapels of his tailored suit, yanking him so violently that his chair skidded across the polished floor. Daniel's head snapped backward, the taste of blood mingling instantly with the bitter burn of whiskey. The second attacker was leaner, faster. He aimed a sharp knee into Daniel's ribs, trying to fold him like paper. The third flanked from behind, cutting off escape eyes, flat with the patience of a hunter who had rehearsed this kill. Guests screamed, forks scraped as diners scrambled back, high heels clattered against marble like frantic percussion. The air once scented with rosemary lamb and truffle pasta now thickened with fear. Claire Morgan Daniels' executive assistant was seated beside him. She had built her career mastering calm in chaos. But this was different. Her chair toppled as she reached for Daniel, instinct louder than logic. She fell hard, her palm scraping the cold stone, but she never took her eyes off her boss being dragged from his seat like prey. Somewhere near the service station, Ethan had been polishing glasses. He was invisible to most patrons, just another dishwasher pressed into uniform when the restaurant needed hands. But to him, invisibility was deliberate, chosen, necessary. He hadn't heard the first scream. He hadn't even looked up when whiskey spilled across white linen. What reached him was motion in the corner of his eye, an angle of attack he recognized too well. His body responded before thought could form. Ethan's mind fractured into 2 tracks. One still the father who checked his daughter's math homework and braided her golden hair. The other, the soldier whose reflexes lived deeper than bone. The first attacker never saw him. Ethan moved fast, no flourish, no wasted gesture. A palm drove into the man's solar plexus, collapsing him like a tent in wind. The sound was air leaving lungs in a desperate whoosh. Ethan's elbow snapped into the man's temple before he could recover. He dropped unconscious, but alive. The second spun fist swinging in a wide arc. Ethan stepped into the strike, not away, his body coiled precise. His fingers pressed into a pressure point below the collarbone, a maneuver drilled 1,000 times in darkness. The man's knees gave way. He crumpled like cloth. The third had already reached inside his jacket. Metal glinted. Gun or knife, it didn't matter. Ethan's foot hooked the man's ankles, sweeping him to the ground. His hand locked around the weapon arm. A crack echoed when skull met marble. Silence followed, broken only by the crystalline tinkle of a spinning wine glass. 4 seconds. 3 bodies. Claire's breath caught. Daniel, clutching his split lip, could only stare. Guests, frozen mid-panic, turned back to see an ordinary man standing among predators, calm as if waiting for a bus. His shirt still tucked, his expression unreadable. Police sirens wailed outside. Ethan raised his hand slightly, signaling compliance, even as his eyes tracked every exit. Officers approached with wary respect weapons, not fully lowered their instincts, whispering that this man was more than a dishwasher. Yes, he told them, voice clipped. I stopped them. No, I don't know them. I'm fine. But behind those words, calculations churned. He saw cameras already flashing, phones recording, a story taking shape he could not control. And all he thought was, what will this mean for Lila? By midnight, the footage had escaped into the world. Shaky cell phone video captured from behind an overturned table showed only his back, the blur of motion, and the brutal efficiency of his strikes. But it was enough. 7 million views by morning, 40 million within the week. In his small Queens apartment, Ethan shut the blinds tighter. He washed dishes by hand as if scrubbing away exposure. But his daughter found it first. Daddy, 8-year-old Lila said that afternoon, her small hands clutching a tablet, her eyes wide with awe. Is this you? Her voice trembled with pride and confusion. Ethan knelt brushing golden hair from her face. He saw Catherine, his late wife, in that same stubborn chin. "Yes," he admitted softly. "That's me. But it's nothing special, just helping someone who needed help. Like when we carry groceries for Mrs. Chen." Lila didn't care for modesty. She flung her arms around him, whispering fiercely against his chest, "I knew you were a superhero." Something inside Ethan cracked a soundless fracture like ice thawing in spring. He held her tight, his calloused hands shaking. 2 days later, Claire Morgan stood in a small playground behind the apartment complex. The autumn sun painted the world in gold. Children's laughter mixed with the squeak of swings. Ethan pushed Lila gently, her feet pumping as she sang about butterflies. He saw Claire coming, though he didn't turn. Years of training never allowed surprise. "Mr. Cross," she said when close enough. Her voice carried corporate polish, but underneath lingered something personal. "I wanted to thank you properly." Ethan's eyes flicked to her, taking in the designer coat, the shoes that cost more than his month's rent, the careful way she stood on grass as if afraid of leaving marks. "No thanks necessary," he replied. His voice was quiet, neutral, but the hint of southern cadence betrayed roots he rarely acknowledged. Lila twisted mid-swing to look at the stranger. In that unfiltered assessment of children, she declared, "I'm Lila, and this is my daddy. He's really strong." For the first time, Claire smiled a smile unpracticed, genuine. Ethan noticed. And though he said nothing more, the world shifted slightly. The invisible man had been seen. Daniel Carter sat in his penthouse office days after the attack, gazing at the skyline through glass walls that reached for heaven. The city glittered below, billions in deals, millions in lives, and yet all he could see was the shadow of the man who had saved him. The memory refused to fade. The precision, the speed, the calm afterward. He replayed it in his head over and over like an equation he couldn't solve. Who was Ethan Cross? For the world, he was a viral mystery. For Daniel, he was a haunting reminder that survival sometimes comes from the most unexpected corners. Ethan's story had not begun in that restaurant. It had been carved across years, scars, and choices. Once he wore a trident patch on his shoulder. Once his life was measured in deployments, classified missions, nights spent in deserts and jungles where silence decided who lived. Navy SEAL Team 6. The kind of words whispered with awe by those who understood. But that life had been ripped from him in a single word: cancer. Catherine's diagnosis came like a sniper's bullet, unseen until too late. One day she was laughing on their cracked leather couch, mocking his terrible taste in television. 6 months later, she was gone, leaving behind Ethan and their daughter, only 8 months old, then her hair already glinting gold in the sun. He had carried rifles in darkness. Now he carried bottles and diapers. He had been trained to break men, but Catherine's absence broke him in ways no battlefield ever had. The transition wasn't gradual. He didn't drift out of the military. He was torn out. One day he was Ethan Cross operator trusted to breach compounds and end wars before they began. The next, he was Ethan Cross widower, holding a child who didn't understand why mommy never came home. The government sent condolences. His unit sent flowers. None of it helped him through nights of screaming infant and an apartment too quiet when she finally slept. So he quit. He traded combat boots for work gloves, training schedules for bedtime stories. It was survival of a different kind. Not glory, not medals, just getting through days, just keeping Lila fed, clothed, safe. Queens became their world. A 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, who brought dumplings when she thought Ethan hadn't eaten. A small school with teachers who adored Lila's stubborn brilliance. A playground where Ethan pushed her on the swings every evening, the rhythm of chains and laughter becoming his anchor. His job at Leonard Restaurant wasn't glamorous. Industrial dishwashers' trays stacked high with porcelain silver polished until his fingers ached. But the hours worked. Nights meant Lila could stay with Mrs. Chen. Days meant he could walk her to school, help with math homework, cook her grilled cheese sandwiches burned at the edges, but always served with a smile. For Ethan, invisibility was survival. He kept his head down, never missed shifts, never asked for more. The staff barely noticed him. Customers never saw him, which suited him just fine. Until the night everything changed. Inside him there was always a battle. Part of him longed to disappear to bury the man he used to be. Another part refused. His body remembered too much. The way his shoulders squared without thinking, the way his eyes scanned every room for exits, the way his hands twitched when someone moved too fast near his daughter. He tried to bury the soldier, but the soldier never really left. And now, thanks to one viral video, the world had seen him. Claire Morgan thought about him constantly. For years, she had perfected invisibility of her own kind. She had built a life of quiet competence. The assistant who smoothed rough edges, who solved problems before her boss even knew they existed. Her wardrobe whispered, never shouted charcoal navy pearl. Her hair pulled into a bun that suggested authority without arrogance. Yet behind the poise was a girl who remembered hunger, whose mother had worked 3 jobs after her father's heart failed when she was 7. Claire had seen survival stripped of romance. She had built her life on control, on never needing anyone. Love once with a banker named Marcus had ended in betrayal and a broken engagement. Since then, she had kept her heart locked, pouring every ounce of tenderness into managing Daniel Carter's impossible schedule, until Ethan Cross. The way he moved, the way he returned to invisibility after saving lives as if heroism was something shameful. The way he pushed his daughter's swing, steady and patient eyes softened by love. Something stirred inside her she hadn't felt in years, not just attraction, recognition. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself unsettled. He had built Carter Industries from ruins, turned his father's failing textile company into a multinational empire, $12 billion, 2 failed marriages, a brother dead in a ski accident while Daniel was closing a merger in Tokyo. He conquered boardrooms like generals conquered fields, but lately, victories felt like ash on his tongue. Every Thursday, he dined at Leonard, shielding himself with investors' clients' company. He hated silence. Silence meant loneliness. Silence meant regret. The night of the attack reminded him that money couldn't buy invulnerability, that beneath layers of wealth and power, he was just a man who could bleed, who could die. And the dishwasher, no, the warrior disguised as a dishwasher, haunted him. In his apartment, Ethan tucked Lila into bed. She curled into blankets, hair splayed across the pillow like a halo. She whispered, "Don't go far, Daddy," before her eyes closed. He sat in the dark afterward, listening to her breathing, steady, safe. His hands, scarred from years of missions, now trembled not from combat, but from fear of exposure. Reporters waited outside the restaurant. Police had asked questions he answered with military brevity. The video spread like wildfire. And he knew what came with fame, curiosity, questions, dangers. He had worked so hard to keep his daughter away from that world. Now it was at their doorstep. And yet beneath the fear was something else. When Claire had thanked him at the playground, when Lila had called him a superhero, he had felt it. A crack in the armor he had built around himself. A whisper that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't finished with him yet. The city kept breathing after the headlines moved on, but Claire Morgan did not. She lay awake with the skyline burning in the window blue and gold and merciless. On her tablet, the restaurant footage looped an overturned chair, a blur in a plain server's jacket, danger, cut down like a ribbon. She muted the audio and watched only the movement, how he entered from nothing, how it was over before fear could find a voice. 4 seconds. A life's training folded into a heartbeat. She'd seen power move before in conference rooms where signatures were weapons. This was different. This power did the necessary thing and tried to leave without a name. Morning would bring lawyers and risk committees. Instead, she opened a private note and typed a single line. "Who are you, Ethan Cross?" The name had come from a payroll whisper from a maitre d' who remembered schedules the way other people remembered birthdays. Dish pit sometimes floor when we're slammed. A footnote to a night that should have ended in obituaries. Claire set the tablet aside. The apartment was the kind of precise she had built herself to be. 3 photographs, her mother at a kitchen table, Claire at 22 on her first day at Carter Industries, a dog she and a man once considered adopting. The dog had found another home. The man, Marcus, had found someone else. She opened the freezer and stared at a small velvet box she kept there because an article once claimed cold preserved gold. It turned out gold didn't tarnish. People did. She shut the door and leaned her forehead against the metal, wishing just for a minute to be someone who didn't calculate consequences before wanting. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel, you awake?" Of course she was. Daniel Carter didn't sleep on nights like this, and when he didn't, she didn't. She called. He answered on the first ring, voice steady the way a man tries to be steady after the ground has moved. What's our exposure? The police will frame it as an assault on a private citizen, she said. For now. For now, he repeated. And the man, an employee of the restaurant, she said. Temporary staff. Name Ethan Cross. Silence stretched. She pictured his pacing window desk bar cart window. Find him, he said at last, not as an order to own a person, but as a plea for one variable he could understand. I'll see what I can do, she replied. After the call, quiet settled with the heaviness of old grief. She remembered a tiled kitchen in a walk-up in the Bronx, her mother's hands raw from cafeteria dishwater, the click of coins counted on Sunday nights. We can't afford trouble, her mother used to say. We afford rent. We afford food. We don't afford trouble. Claire made a life out of that sentence. No risks without insurance. Be indispensable in a way no one applauds like water noticed, mainly when it isn't there. Morning came with choreography, black coffee hair gathered a suit that let her disappear. Security still stopped her in the lobby. New guard, nervous smile. I manage Mr. Carter's life, she said, handing over the badge, which means I also manage your schedule now. He laughed and waved her through. On the executive floor, she set order to chaos. She blocked predators from the calendar. She returned calls in a sequence that kept panic from hardening. She wrote a statement that said enough and nothing. She arranged a private clinic for the elderly investor who had fallen no press, no billing, because mercy is cheapest early. Between tasks, her mind returned to the small Queen's playground. Early fall light, leaves with a shoulder of yellow. Ethan pushing his daughter on a swing with the tenderness of someone who remembered the last time he was helpless to save the person he loved. He had tried to shrink himself even as the space around him bent to his alertness. She had spoken to him the way she spoke to frightened clients, spare words offered like clean water. He had answered with the economy of a man who didn't confuse language with noise. At noon, Daniel stood in her doorway. He didn't look like a commander. He looked like a man learning his body was not a fact he could rely on. Walk with me. They descended. He wasn't just a brawler, Daniel said in the elevator. He moved like a rumor of violence. Then he was gone. He moved like someone with nothing to prove, she said. Those are the ones you notice after the fact. Photographers hunched behind velvet ropes in the lobby. She placed herself half a step ahead of Daniel, absorbing the angles of the lenses, saying nothing. Back upstairs, she drafted contingencies. If the stock dipped, if the board demanded blood, if is a kind of weather. You can't stop it. You can only carry an umbrella and pretend you planned the rain. Near dusk, her mother called. The older woman's voice had the sandpaper softness of hands that never learned to rest. I saw the news, she said. You sounded different last night. How did I sound? Claire asked, watching the skyline pink and then bruise. Like somebody remembering she has a heart, her mother said. Be careful with it. But don't lock it in a freezer, baby. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen. The velvet box slept among frozen peas. I'm careful, she said. That's who I am. Being careful kept us fed. Her mother replied. It never kept us warm. They said their I love yous the way people do when love has to be a verb to survive. After Claire held the phone as if it were a bird she might set free or crush. The office thinned. She remained. Emails slowed to a trickle. The building's hum became a soft ocean. She opened a private search and hesitated. One call to a favor. One query. One look behind the curtain of a man trying to step back into shadow. She closed the window. She opened it again. What am I doing? She whispered. Not about ethics, but about herself. The line between being indispensable and being alive. She wrote a note instead. If I see him again, I'll ask for his story, not his resume. On the way home, the city offered small kindnesses, someone holding a subway door, a teenager giving up a seat, a busker playing Motown that stitched childhood to now. She tipped too much. She bought emergency chocolate because kindness felt like rebellion. At her building, the doorman asked rough day and the voice menus when they suspect you have been brave. It was a day, she said. Tomorrow will be better if we say so out loud. She didn't turn on overhead lights. Lamps made islands. She put the chocolate in the bottom desk drawer because that is where hope goes for later. Her phone vibrated with a message from a number she did not recognize. "Thank you for checking on the investor who fell. He's fine." No last name. No flourish. She sat down suddenly, the way you do when the ground you feared might be empty turns out to hold. She typed erased, typed erased. Finally, "I'm glad he's all right. Take care of your daughter tonight." Long pause. The city outside adjusted its lights one by one. Then always. She set the phone down and breathed. At the window, people moved in little rivers of purpose. Somewhere below, lives began and ended and began again. She thought of a widower soldier who polished glasses to pay rent, a child with gold hair and the stubborn chin of a girl who would not be told what she couldn't do, a man who would rather vanish than be applauded. "Who are you, Ethan?" "Cross," she asked the glass, and for the first time the question felt less like research and more like prayer. Behind her the freezer hummed. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and boardrooms and the low-level siege of surviving other people's panic. Daniel's restlessness, cameras, aftershocks no one could schedule around. Tonight brought a quiet thread stretched between two apartments, barely there, but strong enough to feel when she breathed. She turned off the last lamp. For the first time in years, she slept. He woke before sunrise because sleep fled the moment the city went quiet. The penthouse didn't exhale like ordinary apartments. It held its breath. Daniel Carter lay in the dim wash from the avenue and listened to silence that sounded like water pressing against glass. His jaw still throbbed where a stranger's fist had landed. Beneath that ache pulsed the memory of 4 seconds that refused to release him. He rose. The floors were cool. The kitchen smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and nothing else. He ground beans and watched steam feather against the window. In the reflection, he saw a man he recognized only in fragments. The tailored certainty, the hungry eyes, the mouth tired from winning battles that tasted like loss. Crystal had skittered across marble like small animals trying to flee, and he could still hear the sound. The tablet lay on the counter. He didn't need to press play. His body remembered the sequence. But he watched anyway, punishing himself with the choreography, the jerk from the chair, the drag of the suit, the blur that entered frame and ended it. Ethan Cross. A rumor that moved like purpose. A man who preferred the corner of the frame. He paused the video on the moment after. Calm. Hands half raised for police without surrendering awareness. Eyes triangulating exits, choke points people. Leadership recognizes leadership even when it hides. Daniel knew it. He had worn that disguise in other rooms. The coffee was too strong. He drank anyway, swallowing bitterness like penance. His phone lit with obligations. Board chair, PR, general counsel, security. All the departments that arrive after a storm and call themselves weather. Anita Shaw, general counsel, answered first. Her voice carried the practiced calm of someone who kept companies from bleeding to death through paper cuts. "Civil exposure looks containable," she said. "Criminal is for the police. The restaurant carries the site liability, but plaintiffs sue the closest gravity. That's you." He watched the frozen frame of Ethan on the screen. "And the man employee of the restaurant," Anita said. "Not ours. Optics are dramatic. Hero saves billionaire is a headline people want. We should be careful not to look like we're weaponizing him." "I won't," Daniel said, and surprised himself by meaning it. PR called next. Owen's voice came sugared the way it always did when Fear sat at his desk. "Morning shows, late night, a Sunday feature that thinks it's compassionate. I can push back or I can aim it." "Control operations," Daniel said. "No camera crews near my office. No interviews. Claire will issue a written statement. I'll thank who needs thanking, that's all. And if the video keeps climbing..." "It will," he said. "We hold our nerve." He ended the call and stood with both hands on the counter, feeling the cold stone press into his palms. Below, traffic woke and argued with itself. He envied the simplicity of people with somewhere obvious to be. The elevator to the gym was a private descent. In the mirror, he watched himself stand straighter as if posture could correct the narrative. He lifted, he rode, he ran. Sweat darkened his shirt, spreading like a confession. Pain obeyed rules the market did not. At 8 sharp, he stepped off the treadmill and saw what unsettled him most: fear lingering behind his own eyes. Not terror, something quieter. The thought that money for once might not buy survival. He showered, dressed, let the armor assemble, suit, watch, cufflinks, mask. The driver opened the car door. The day opened its mouth. At headquarters, glass and chrome greeted him like polite adversaries. The lobby terrarium glowed with curated green. Cameras tracked. Guards nodded with the same respect they gave dignitaries in high-risk packages. Claire waited by the private elevator's tablet in hand, a crease between her brows that meant she had already solved 3 of the 5 problems he hadn't seen yet. Anita at 9. Owen at 9:30, she murmured as they walked. Board at 10, security at 11. I moved the Singapore call. They'll live. What about the man Daniel asked? She didn't look up from the tablet. I'm in contact, quietly. He heard the second sentence she didn't speak. Don't break the thing you might need later by exposing it too early. The board convened in rectangles and suits and feigned concern. Whitaker led with words sharpened by habit. Optics, he said. Exposure. Contagion risk. Daniel imagined the man turning his own pulse into a spreadsheet. We didn't plan the assault, Daniel said when it was his turn, his voice draped in iron. We survived it. We'll continue to survive it. I'm implementing changes to security. We will not discuss them on a call with 9 people who think their living rooms are soundproof. You seem cavalier, Whitaker pressed. Daniel leaned into the camera until only his eyes lived there. I seem alive, he said, and I intend to remain that way. Meeting adjourned. He shut the laptop. His reflection stared back, blurred, more human than Titan. Security came next. Bullet points slid across a screen. Access points, perimeters, key cards. The ritual comfort of competence. Daniel approved expenditures that promised less than they claimed. Rotate routes, he ordered, stagger arrivals. No routine lasts more than 3 days. His eyes flicked to Claire, who caught the instruction already translating into calendar math. When the room emptied, quiet returned brittle and thin. Claire lingered. She stood by the window, her face held in the exact neutrality he paid for and increasingly worried about. You're thinking something you haven't said, Daniel told her. She drew a breath. Vulnerability isn't only physical. Harden the building all you want. If soft hearts remain inside, someone will pry. You mean me? I mean all of us. But yes, he laughed once without heat. Prescription: fall in love and become a better human. Her eyes flickered almost a smile. If I could schedule that, sir, I'd be on retainer for the species. He turned to the cabinet, poured bourbon, didn't drink it. Send a letter? He said finally. Courier. Company letterhead. Invite Mr. Cross here. Claire tilted her head. To offer him what? Something he can refuse without penalty. I want to see what kind of man says no to money, like it's a language he never learned. She didn't write it down, which meant she'd remember. After she left, he walked to the corridor of photographs, magazine covers, groundbreakings, winds frozen in glass. He recognized the stance more than the eyes. One photo was missing his brother Aiden, cheeks raw from cold goggles perched above his smile. Dead on a ski slope while Daniel closed a merger in Tokyo. He had sent money flown home for a day, then gone back. The world didn't pause for grief. Now staring at Aiden's face in memory, Daniel pressed fingers to his brow. He stood like that for long minutes, a man measuring whether his house could withstand a storm. At dusk, he told the driver to take the long way home. The city lit itself like a defense. Crowds streamed alive with uncalculated purpose. He watched from behind glass, both inside and outside his own life. The penthouse waited, disciplined and empty. He microwaved a plate someone had left covered in the fridge, ate 3 bites, set it aside. He pressed middle C on the piano with one finger. The note hung like a possibility unearned. His phone buzzed. Claire's message, letter sent. He wrote back, "Thank you." Then, because it was truer than efficiency required, for everything. He set the phone down and pressed both hands against the window. He wondered what Ethan Cross was doing with his daughter right now. Homework, dishes, a bedtime story in a room that couldn't buy the night, but knew how to keep it safe. He imagined a table too small for its pride. A girl with gold hair deciding the world was fair because her father made it so. Tomorrow, he whispered to the glass, "We try another way." The city answered with lights. By the third morning, the video had grown into something Ethan could no longer pretend wasn't there. At the newsstand outside Lila's school, tabloids screamed in bold type mystery hero. Dishwasher saves billionaire. Faces of the attackers blurred, but his own silhouette frozen mid-strike printed beneath headlines he would never read aloud. He kept his head low as he walked Lila to the gate. Parents whispered, children pointed. He tugged his cap lower, kissed his daughter on the crown, and said, "Have a good day, Bug." She smiled, but her eyes lingered on him as though afraid he might vanish into some headline instead of returning at 3 o'clock. He turned away, feeling her gaze burn between his shoulders. The apartment felt smaller now. Curtains drawn tight, blinds angled against curious lenses. Reporters had already knocked, once polite at first, then insistent. Mrs. Chen downstairs chased them off with language Ethan pretended not to understand, though the meaning was clear. Leave this family alone. He stood in the kitchen, calloused hands braced against laminate counters. His heart pounded harder now than it had that night in the restaurant. Combat he could handle. Exposure was different. The sound of small feet echoed down the hall. Lila burst in cheeks, flushed tablet clutched to her chest. "Daddy, look!" She thrust it up. The video looped again, shaky but undeniable, his back, his strikes, the chaos collapsing in his wake. Her voice trembled with excitement. "It's you, isn't it? Everyone says it is." He knelt, taking the device from her small fingers. On screen, his shadow blurred against marble. He hated the recognition in her eyes, the pride mixed with confusion. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's me." Her mouth curved into a grin that belonged entirely to her mother. "I knew it. I told Emma my dad was a superhero. She didn't believe me. Now she has to." She wrapped her arms around his neck, fierce and sudden. "I knew you could do anything." Something broke inside him, soundless but deep. He held her until she squirmed, laughing. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "I can't do everything, Bug, but I'll always try for you." 2 days later, Claire Morgan found her way to his world. It wasn't an official meeting, no suits, no statements. Just a woman in a long coat stepping carefully across grass in a small playground in Queens. Ethan was already there, steady hands pushing his daughter on the swing, autumn sunlight spilling gold across everything. He saw her coming. Of course he did. Years of habits never unlearned. His eyes marked her steps, her composure, the deliberate way she chose not to hurry. He didn't stop the swing, didn't run. "Mr. Cross," she said softly when near enough. Her voice carried corporate polish, but underneath it lay something he couldn't name. "I wanted to thank you properly." He turned his head, studying her like a soldier studies terrain. Designer coat shoes worth his rent, careful posture on grass that seemed foreign to her. "No thanks necessary," he said, tone flat. Southern accent faint beneath the neutral edges. The swing creaked. Lila twisted around, midair, hair flying. "I'm Lila. This is my daddy. He's really strong." Claire smiled, then a real smile, unpracticed, warmer than anything she'd worn in boardrooms. Ethan caught it, and against his will, something inside him shifted. They stood in silence while the swing arced. Children's laughter rang around them, ordinary and eternal. For Ethan, it felt like standing on a threshold he had vowed never to cross again. That evening, when the playground emptied, Claire lingered. She glanced at the cracked slide, the basketball hoop leaning sideways, the graffiti hearts etched by teenagers who thought love permanent. "You're not what you seem," she said finally. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Neither are you." A pause stretched. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, both recognized the truth. Two people who had built lives on invisibility, colliding in a moment where hiding no longer worked. She inclined her head, almost a bow. "Good night, Mr. Cross." "Good night, Miss Morgan." She left her heels careful against uneven sidewalk. Ethan watched until she turned the corner, then looked down at his daughter asleep against his chest. He whispered to her hair, "We'll stay invisible, Bug, no matter what." But even as he said it, he knew the world had already seen. Back in his penthouse, Daniel Carter sat before walls of glass, the city spread beneath him like a game board. A cloth pressed to his lip where the wound still stung. He remembered Ethan's refusal in the lettered silence of that fight, a man who saved lives and tried to vanish. For the first time in decades, Daniel felt something unfamiliar gratitude that couldn't be purchased. He swirled whiskey in his glass, staring at the skyline. "Who are you, Ethan Cross?" he murmured, the question drifting into the night. The city answered with lights, and somewhere in Queens a child whispered in her sleep, "My daddy's a superhero." The letter arrived by hand, thick envelope, embossed seal, delivered by a courier in a suit, who seemed embarrassed to be holding it. Ethan opened the door in a faded t-shirt, wary eyes already calculating escape. The man extended the envelope like an apology. "From Carter Industries," he said. Ethan stared. The courier fidgeted. Finally, Ethan accepted it, closed the door, and stood in the silence of the apartment. At the kitchen table, scarred wood crumbs from Lila's breakfast still scattered, he opened the letter. The words were measured as though someone had labored over every sentence. An invitation, a request, a summons dressed as courtesy. "Mr. Cross," it read, "we would be honored by your presence at Carter Industries headquarters. Thursday, 11 a.m. Please allow us to express gratitude in person." It ended with Daniel Carter's signature, a flourish that carried billions. Ethan folded the letter once, twice, then set it down as if it might burn. Said. He knew what it meant. Money. Favors. The machine pulling him in. He wanted none of it. That night, he tucked Lila into bed. She clutched her stuffed rabbit eyes heavy. "Are you going to work again, Daddy?" "Yes," he whispered. "Always work." She frowned. "I don't want them to take you away." He smoothed her hair. "No one's taking me anywhere." But when she slept, he sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the folded paper. He remembered Catherine's laugh, the way she had teased him about his stubborn pride. "You'd rather starve than owe anyone," she had said once. She wasn't wrong. He would go, not for money, not for favors, for the clarity of refusal. The headquarters towered 43 stories above the city, glass and steel that caught sunlight like a blade. Ethan wore his only suit, a relic from Catherine's funeral, shoulders tight, fabric faded. He moved through the lobby with the bearing of a man who saw every angle. Guards glanced at him, puzzled, sensing something not explained by his clothes. On the 43rd floor, chrome and art and silence swallowed him. A desk the size of a boat dominated the office. Behind it, Daniel Carter paced like a caged general. Claire stood in the corner, tablet in hand, gaze carefully neutral. Ethan waited at the threshold until Daniel gestured. "Mr. Cross." Daniel began, voice wrapped in charm and command. "You saved my life. Twice, really. Once in the restaurant, once by vanishing before the reporters could devour you. I owe you more than thanks." Ethan said nothing. His silence filled the room. Daniel continued. "A job. Head of security. 6 figures. Benefits. College for your daughter secured. A future that doesn't depend on dishwashers and night shifts." The offer gleamed like a weapon laid on the table. Ethan's reply was flat as prairie land. "I'm not interested in your money." Daniel blinked, genuinely startled. Men did not refuse him. Not this way. Everyone wants something. "I want to be left alone," Ethan said, already moving toward the door. "Wait," Daniel pressed. "You're throwing away?" "My daughter wants her father safe every night," Ethan interrupted, hand on the handle. "That's all I want too." He opened the door. Claire stood, then, her eyes catching his. For a moment, something unspoken passed recognition, maybe understanding. He nodded once, then vanished into the elevator, leaving silence behind him. Back at the apartment, Ethan shed the suit, returned to dishes and homework. Normalcy. Yet Claire's gaze lingered in his mind. The way she had looked at him, not as a headline, not as a commodity, but as a man. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself invisibility was still possible. But deep down, he knew the world had already marked him. The supermarket aisles hummed with fluorescent light, and the low murmur of tired parents negotiating with children over candy. It was October, shelves swollen with plastic pumpkins and polyester ghost costumes stacked in messy heaps. Ethan moved slowly, one hand steadying the cart, the other picking through outfits small enough for Lila. She wanted to be a ninja. Of course she did. His girl was all energy, all fierce insistence that princesses could backflip and warriors could wear pink. He picked up a black hooded costume, held it against the air, imagining her spinning across the living room carpet with foam swords. "Not bad," a voice said behind him. He stiffened, turning. Claire Morgan stood at the end of the aisle, out of place among the candy skulls and rubber bats. Her dark coat cut a clean line against the cheap costumes. She carried no cart, just a small basket, and the faintest smile that looked like she was surprising herself by being here. "Ms. Morgan," he said carefully. "Let me guess," she replied, stepping closer. Eyes on the ninja outfit. "She wants to be a warrior, or a queen, or both." Ethan almost smiled. "Almost? A ninja. She says princesses can't do backflips." Claire tilted her head, pretending to examine the plastic swords. Smart girl. A warrior in disguise. They walked side by side through the aisles, a surreal parody of normality. She trailed her fingers along packages of fake cobwebs, listening as he spoke of Lila's stubborn streak of her refusal to accept bedtime without one more story. And then unexpectedly he found himself telling her about Catherine, about his wife's terrible taste in reality television, about the way she had laughed in hospital rooms, as if she could will sickness away. He didn't say the word cancer. He didn't have to. The silence that followed carried it. Claire listened without interruption. Her face softened, eyes lowered. Finally, she said, "She sounds braver than most people I know. She was—" Ethan admitted, throat tight. For a moment, between polyester ghosts and cheap candy, they stood in a silence that felt almost holy. At the register, Lila ran up clutching a headband with plastic cat ears. She skidded to a stop when she saw Claire. Her eyes narrowed with 8-year-old suspicion. "Who's that?" Ethan glanced at Claire. "This is Miss Morgan. She works with Mr. Carter." Claire crouched, lowering herself to Lila's height. "I'm Claire," she said softly. "And I hear you're going to be a ninja." Lila studied her chin tilted, assessing with the seriousness only a child could carry. Then she nodded once. "Okay. But ninjas don't need help." Claire smiled, genuine and warm. "Maybe not, but even ninjas like company sometimes." Ethan watched the exchange, feeling something shift again inside him. Claire rose, meeting his gaze, and he saw the faint crack in her professional armor. Something warmer, something unplanned. In the parking lot, the air smelled of rain. They loaded the cart in silence. Claire looked out across the rows of cars, her voice low. "You know, she said Daniel hasn't been the same since that night. He won't admit it, but he's afraid." "He should be," Ethan replied. "They'll come again." Her eyes flicked to his, searching. "And you—" "I don't get to be afraid," he said simply. She nodded. For a moment it felt like she wanted to say more. Instead, she adjusted her coat and said, "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Claire." Back at the apartment, Lila twirled in her ninja costume mask, too large, giggling as Ethan tied the belt. She darted around the room, plastic sword in hand. "See," she shouted. "Princesses can do backflips." Ethan laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. For the first time in years, the apartment felt less heavy. When Lila finally fell asleep, curled against her stuffed rabbit, Ethan sat in the quiet. His mind returned to Claire, to the way she had listened, the way she had crouched to meet his daughter's eyes without condescension. He told himself it was nothing, but deep inside he knew some walls had begun to crack. And somewhere uptown, Claire lay awake in her sleek apartment tablet, open to spreadsheets she wasn't reading. Her mind replayed Ethan's voice, the fragments of grief he had allowed her to see. She closed the device and whispered into the dark, as if answering him across the city. "You don't have to be afraid." But he couldn't hear her. The investigation moved faster than the news cycle. Detectives came and went from the restaurant, gathering statements, pulling security footage. The official narrative called it an isolated incident. Ethan didn't need to read the file to know better. Violence that polished didn't happen by accident. And sure enough, the name surfaced. A competitor, one Daniel Carter, had crushed 2 years earlier. A family-owned business taken apart in a hostile takeover, its patriarch dead by his own hand. For Ethan, the math was easy grief plus humiliation equaled revenge. Daniel doubled his security detail. Extra cars. Armed men in black suits. It was a fortress in motion, but Ethan knew fortresses only worked if you never had to leave them. The next attempt came sooner than anyone wanted to believe. It was a Tuesday, clear sky Manhattan, glowing in late autumn light. Daniel stood in his office dictating notes when the bullet screamed through the glass. He wasn't in the chair. It was luck or biology or both. A bathroom break at the right second saved him. The shot spiderwebbed the window shards raining across the carpet. Daniel stumbled back, breath-ragged. For once, Claire's composure cracked. She shoved him behind the desk, her own body shielding him, heart hammering in her throat. The shooter was gone by the time security reached the roof. All that remained was a message carved into the access door. This isn't over. That night, Daniel made the call himself. No lawyers, no assistants, just his voice stripped of armor. I need your help, he said. On the other end, Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to his ear, staring at Lila as she drew stars across her homework margins. He could hear the strain in Daniel's voice, the sound of a man who had built walls of wealth only to find them hollow. I can pay. Daniel added quickly as if the offer might make the plea less raw. It's not about money, Ethan interrupted. His tone was quiet, final. If I do this, it's to end it, permanently. And you follow my rules, not yours. There was a pause. Then Daniel exhaled a long, tired breath. Agreed. The next morning, Ethan walked into Carter Industries as if he belonged, the official line consultant. That word explained his presence without raising questions. He moved through the building with eyes that noticed everything. The predictable routes, the compromised personnel, the doors that opened too easily. By noon, he'd identified 17 vulnerabilities. He delivered the list like a grocery order, no drama, no explanation. Fix these, he said simply. Daniel listened, arms folded. Claire sat nearby, tablet open, watching Ethan's profile more than the words. She realized then this man lived at a different level of perception. He didn't just see threats, he predicted them. Later, as they walked out, she caught up beside him. You didn't hesitate, she said. Ethan glanced at her. Hesitation gets people killed. Her voice softened. You've done this before. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed constantly. Secure conference rooms became their battlefield. She brought knowledge of corporate patterns of Daniel's stubborn routines. He brought instincts honed in deserts and jungles. Together, they mapped threats, countermeasures, contingencies. She learned to read him in subtler ways. A flicker in his eyes meant concern. A tightening of his jaw meant catastrophe. He learned her habits too. How she hummed Motown under her breath when stress crept in. How she kept emergency chocolate in her bottom drawer. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But the ground beneath them shifted inch by inch until the idea of distance felt unnatural. Meanwhile, Lila began asking when the pretty lady would visit. Ethan brushed it off with a grunt, but inside unease curled. His daughter had a way of seeing truths before he admitted them, and so he kept telling himself the same lie: he was here to end a threat, nothing more. But even as he repeated it, he found himself listening for Claire's voice in hallways, watching her reflection in glass, noticing the way her laugh lit spaces Daniel's empire never could. The enemy watched too. 2 men were caught in the parking garage, tools and hand wires coiled. Interrogation yielded nothing. But the equipment bore hallmarks. Ethan recognized military precision, black market sourcing. He studied the pattern and knew the truth: this would escalate until someone ended it. He pulled Daniel aside after the arrests. His voice carried the quiet intensity that once made generals pause. They won't stop, he said. Each failure makes them more desperate, more dangerous. Next time they might go after people you care about. Daniel's eyes flicked toward Claire across the room. She was coordinating with federal agents, her face composed but her hands tight around the tablet. Ethan saw what Daniel would not admit: she was his weakness. What do you suggest? Daniel asked finally. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. We make them come to us. On our ground. Our terms. And we end it. The estate in Westchester spread across 40 acres of manicured lawns and stone walls, an empire of success. Daniel Carter rarely called home. That was where Ethan began laying the trap. It was not just security work. It was orchestration, a chess match where lives were pieces. Officially, he was a consultant reviewing protocols. That explained his presence without advertising his true purpose. He moved quietly, adjusting routes, sealing blind spots, changing locks without ceremony. Cameras appeared where shadows once ruled. Guards who thought themselves competent discovered how easily they could be outmaneuvered. Ethan drilled them until they sweated fear of mistakes. By evening, he stood on the terrace scanning tree lines, the long driveway, the estate that glowed like a beacon. He could feel them out there waiting, planning. Violence was only ever patient. Inside, Claire worked beside him. She brought insight not from the battlefield, but from boardrooms. She knew Daniel's habits, his stubbornness, the rhythms of his life. She whispered to Ethan where routine might betray them, which nights Daniel insisted on his study, which mornings he never missed a call. Her precision matched his instincts like a puzzle snapping together. "Why do you trust me with this?" she asked. Once late in the war room, documents scattered between them. Ethan didn't look up. "Because you don't waste words, and you see what he won't." She held his gaze unsettled by the weight of his certainty. They became partners without deciding to. Hours in conference rooms turned into quiet exchanges over coffee. She learned the way his voice softened when he spoke of Lila, how bedtime stories mattered more than any mission. He learned how her composure cracked just slightly when she admitted she read romance novels at night, not leadership books. Lila herself asked one evening, "Daddy, when's the pretty lady coming back?" Ethan muttered something evasive, but his daughter only smirked, seeing more than he wanted. The truth was, there unspoken, Claire had begun to step inside their circle, and Ethan, for all his resolve, didn't entirely push her away. The enemy pressed closer. Surveillance showed men loitering near the parking garage, patterns of movement too disciplined to be casual. Ethan knew the rhythm professionals, not amateurs. They were probing defenses waiting for the one night someone blinked, and so the plan crystallized bait them with a meeting leak it through channels they monitored. Appear vulnerable but never unprepared. Daniel resisted at first. "You're telling me to dangle myself like meat?" Ethan's reply was calm, final. "Yes, because if you keep waiting, they'll choose the ground, and they'll choose her." His eyes flicked toward Claire before he could stop himself. Daniel followed the glance, jaw tightening. He didn't argue again. The night before the plan unfolded, Ethan drove Lila to Mrs. Chen's sister in New Jersey. The girl clutched his hand in the doorway, sensing this was different from ordinary nights apart. "Important work," he said, kneeling to her height. His voice roughened despite himself. "Just one night bug. I'll be back." She studied him with solemn eyes, then hugged him fiercely. "Be careful, Daddy. Superheroes don't always come back in cartoons." He swallowed hard, holding her longer than he meant to. "I'll come back," he promised. Whether to her or to himself, he didn't know. At the estate, preparations turned every room into a weapon. Some doors sealed automatically. Others remained unlocked, inviting but trapped. Motion sensors hummed. Hidden passages became escape routes. Ethan memorized every inch until the mansion itself felt like a map in his bones. Claire insisted on staying. "If something happens to him, I need to be here," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It will happen," Ethan replied. "That's the point." Her eyes did not waver. "Then you'll need me too." He wanted to protest, but the determination in her voice silenced him. As midnight approached, the estate exhaled silence. Daniel paced his study, unused to being bait. Claire sat rigid in a chair, knuckles white around her phone. Ethan moved through the halls like a ghost, every sense sharpened. 2 a.m. they came. Not 3 this time, 7. Through the trees across the lawn, coordinated with signals that spoke of shared training. Their leader moved differently, a scarred man with dead eyes, carrying personal vendetta in his stride. Silas. A former security contractor once employed by Daniel, now turned predator. Ethan watched them on monitors, the enemy converging like wolves. He turned to Claire, handing her a secured phone. His eyes locked on hers. "Stay with him. Lock the safe room. Don't open for anyone but me. Only when I give the code word." She nodded, then impulsively, almost too fast to register, her fingers brushed his. "Be careful," she whispered. He allowed himself one squeeze of her hand. Just one. Then he vanished into the dark, where violence waited. The east wing of the estate was silent, except for the hum of security cameras. Ethan crouched in the shadows, every muscle tuned like wire. He had designed this wing as the funnel, the killing ground. Wide halls narrowed into choke points. Marble pillars cast deep shadows. Every painting on the wall was irrelevant. Architecture itself would be the weapon. Through the monitor feed, he had watched them fan out 7 men professional confident. Silas, the scarred leader, moved with the certainty of someone who had trained others before turning rogue. His eyes scanned as if the mansion's wealth insulted him. Ethan whispered into his earpiece, though he knew Claire and Daniel were sealed tight in the safe room. "They're inside." He didn't wait for a reply. He slid into position, one more shadow among many. The first 2 intruders never had a chance. They moved down a side corridor, rifles raised boots soft on imported carpet. Ethan's hand shot out, palm striking the first man's throat with surgical force. He dragged him into darkness before the body hit the floor. The second turned, muzzle flashing, but Ethan was already inside his line elbow, cracking against his temple. 2 seconds, 2 down. The third heard something just enough to shout before Ethan's arm locked around his throat. A blood choke, precise, merciful compared to other options. The man sagged unconscious against Ethan's chest. Ethan lowered him silently to the floor. But Silas heard. A sharp whistle split the air. Suddenly the careful rhythm broke. Orders barked. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing the dark. Ethan dove behind a marble column. Bullets shattered plaster, ricocheted off stone. He rolled low, moved fast. This was his element. Chaos turned into choreography. He pushed through the dining hall using the room itself as ally. A heavy oak door slammed into a man's face with a sickening crunch. Another attacker pursued, only to trip the wire Ethan had strung hours earlier. A deafening snap as he fell, weapon clattering across tile. The kitchen became a battlefield of noise. 2 men entered, coordinated. Ethan used their own movements against them, sidestepping into one's blind spot, forcing the other's muzzle to track too slowly. Shots tore into stainless steel instead of flesh. A knife slid into Ethan's hand. He didn't remember drawing it, slicing a tendon with precision. The man dropped, screaming, weapon clattering, useless. The 5th went down. That left Silas and 1 more. Silas moved differently. Ethan could feel it even before he saw him. This was not desperation, it was personal. Silas had been trained. The way he swept corners, the way his weapon tracked ahead of him, military or close enough. They met in the foyer beneath a chandelier that scattered fractured light across marble streaked with blood. Ethan's ribs burned from a hit he hadn't fully absorbed. His left hand throbbed where bone might be cracked. A shallow knife wound bled through his shirt, sticky warmth down his side. Silas stepped forward, scar catching the light. His voice was gravel ground through rage. "You don't know what he did. Carter destroyed everything, left good people with nothing." Ethan kept his breathing steady, cataloging pain-adjusting stance. "And this fixes it." "It makes him pay," Silas snarled. Ethan shifted his weight. "No, it just makes you another dead man." The clash was brutal, stripped of finesse. Fists, knees, elbows, desperation. They crashed through furniture. A coffee table splintered beneath their weight. Ethan's breath came ragged ribs protesting with every strike. Silas fought with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. For the first time that night, Ethan felt tested. Pain blurred edges. The knife wound tugged him downward. His vision pulsed at the edges. But in the chaos, something anchored him. Memory of Lila's hug, her fierce whisper. Superheroes don't always come back. No, he had promised her. When Silas lunged with a telegraphed haymaker born of exhaustion, Ethan shifted. His counter was fast, decisive combination of strikes drilled into muscle memory. Silas hit the floor, gasping, unconscious but alive. Ethan stood above him, chest heaving. Because when his daughter had asked if he'd killed anyone since leaving the service, he had said no. And he intended to keep that promise. The silence afterward was deafening. Only the creak of the chandelier swaying above the drip of blood on marble. Ethan staggered, pressing a hand against his side. He whispered the code word into the radio. A click. The safe room door opened. Claire stepped out first, eyes sweeping him, cataloging every wound even as she masked her fear. Behind her, Daniel followed, pale, shaken phone still clutched in his hand. "You're hurt," Claire said unnecessarily, already moving to find first aid. Her hands were steady, precise, but her touch was gentle on his split knuckles. "I've had worse," Ethan muttered, though his ribs screamed otherwise. She worked in silence, dabbing blood-taping gauze. When she finished, she leaned against him just slightly, her weight warm against his uninjured side. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Thank you." Not just for tonight, for all of it. Outside, sirens grew louder. Red and blue painted the trees as dawn threatened. Federal agents stormed the estate, cuffing Silas and the others, beginning the slow work of unraveling betrayal. Ethan leaned back against the cold wall. Claire closed Daniel, speaking into a phone with shaking hands. The war was not over. But tonight at least they were still alive. The sun rose over the estate in streaks of pale gold, but inside the great house the aftermath still clung like smoke. Furniture lay broken across marble floors. Splintered wood shattered glass drops of blood that hadn't yet dried, proof of a night where silence had nearly given way to death. Federal agents moved with clipboards and cameras, tagging evidence, murmuring into radios. Daniel Carter stood in his study, shoulders hunched, as if carrying the weight of an empire and the humiliation of nearly losing it. He signed papers without reading them, his pen trembling in ways his board had never seen. Every so often his eyes flicked to the window as though expecting another bullet to carve through the glass. Claire hovered nearby, orchestrating chaos with quiet authority. She scheduled statements, coordinated with law enforcement, ensured the narrative didn't slip beyond control. Yet every time her gaze strayed to Ethan Cross, leaning against the doorway, bloodied shirt stiff against his ribs, her composure faltered for a heartbeat. He looked like a man carved out of exhaustion and refusal. And yet he stood tall, unbent. By afternoon, agents discovered what Ethan had suspected all along: rot from the inside. A mole within Carter Industries itself. The head of security, a man Daniel had trusted for a decade, was arrested at the airport trying to flee with falsified documents. Betrayal had festered, not at the gates, but at the heart. When they led the man away in cuffs, Daniel's face went gray. He had conquered markets, toppled rivals, but hadn't seen the knife growing in his own shadow. Ethan's voice was low, almost kind, despite the bluntness. "You build fortresses, you should expect someone inside wants the key." Daniel said nothing. He only turned back to the window, hands gripping the sill as if it might anchor him. That weak pressure mounted. Reporters swarmed the story, demanding names. The internet had christened Ethan the Invisible Guardian. Viral threads speculated about his past. Was he ex-military intelligence, a hired gun? Ethan avoided cameras, turning his back whenever flashes erupted. But Daniel, against legal advice, scheduled a press conference. Claire fought him, reasoning it would only fuel the fire. But he stood firm, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of something deeper, an uncharacteristic need for transparency. "I won't let them spin this," he said. "The world will hear the truth from me." The day of the press conference, the atrium was filled with microphones and restless reporters. Cameras gleamed like hungry eyes. Daniel stepped to the podium, bandaged lip, visible suit, pressed posture regal. "Last week, he began, voice resonant, my life, and the lives of my colleagues were nearly taken. I stand here because one man chose action when others froze. I owe him more than I can ever repay." He paused, eyes finding Ethan at the back of the room. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in a borrowed suit, standing as far from the spotlight as possible. Ethan Cross. Daniel continued, "Is the reason I am alive. He asked for no payment. He wanted only safety for his daughter. In a world where everything has a price, I ask you to remember what it means when someone refuses to sell courage." Flashes erupted, questions flew, but Daniel raised a hand. "That is all." He stepped back, ending it before the feeding frenzy could devour Ethan whole. Ethan slipped out through the side exit. Claire followed. In the alley behind the building, he leaned against brick, tugging at the suffocating tie. She found him there, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. "You hate this," she said. He glanced at her, jaw tight. "Attention is a leash, and I don't wear leashes." Her lips curved, almost sad. "Even heroes need stories told." "I'm no hero," he muttered. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Tell that to Daniel. Tell it to those investors. Tell it to your daughter who thinks you're stronger than anyone alive." Her words pierced the armor. For a moment he let himself imagine what she saw, not a ghost of war, but a father who refused to break. That night back in Queens, Lila sat cross-legged on the couch, tablet in her lap. The video of Daniel's speech played again. Her eyes were wide, shining. "Daddy," she whispered. "He said your name." Ethan froze in the kitchen doorway, drying his hands on a rag. He said, "You're the reason he's alive." Her voice was filled with awe, but beneath it something more fragile, fear that the world might take him away, that others would claim him now. He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and took the tablet from her trembling hands. "I don't care what he said. You listen to me, Bug." His voice softened. "I'm yours. Only yours." She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Promise, promise." Elsewhere in the city, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse. Whiskey in hand, he replayed his own words from the press conference. They rang hollow against the glass walls. Gratitude had not dulled the loneliness gnawing at him. He thought of Ethan's refusal of money, of his daughter's bright hair, of the quiet gravity Claire seemed to reserve for him. For the first time in his life, Daniel Carter, emperor of boardrooms, realized money had not bought him the thing he envied most: belonging. The winter night pressed heavy against the city, a cold wind slicing between buildings, rattling street lamps. Inside the Carter estate, the war rooms had been dismantled, but Ethan's mind refused to rest. He sat in his queen's apartment, every creak of the pipes and every honk of distant traffic filtering through instincts that would never quiet. Lila slept down the hall, the rise and fall of her breathing, a rhythm steadier than any clock. Ethan should have felt peace. Instead, unease settled in his bones. He had seen the pattern before: escalation, retreat, escalation again. Silas and his men were only pieces of a larger board. Somewhere out there, hands were still moving them. He wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, the attempt came again. This time, not subtle. The parking garage beneath Carter Industries was nearly empty when security caught two men crawling beneath a sedan, their hands busy with wires and timers. They were armed with patience and precision. Professionals. No tattoos, no street-level chaos, just clean efficiency, like Ethan's former life reflected back at him in shadow. Interrogation yielded nothing. They sat in silence, eyes empty, jaws locked. But the equipment bore signatures Ethan knew: black market circuits, a detonator model used overseas. This wasn't revenge by grieving amateurs anymore. This was escalation. This was war. Ethan studied the aftermath with quiet fury. His report was blunt. They won't stop. Every failure makes them hungrier. Desperation grows teeth. Daniel stood nearby, his hands shoved into pockets, face pale under expensive lighting. For once, there was no boardroom polish, no carefully timed wit, just fear disguised as frustration. "Then what do we do?" Daniel asked. Ethan fixed him with eyes that saw through walls. "We set the ground. Force them to come. End it." Daniel hesitated, but only briefly. He knew Ethan's words carried weight carved from 1,000 unseen battles. And still Ethan's gaze flicked toward Claire. She stood across the room coordinating agents, her brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't want to admit what he knew: she was Daniel's weakness. The one pressure point enemies would eventually strike. He clenched his fists. This had to end. Preparations began. The estate in Westchester became the chosen ground again, but this time with precision so sharp it could draw blood. A board meeting was scheduled, carefully leaked through compromised channels. Guards rotated with deliberate irregularity. Certain doors were left unlocked, bait for eyes watching from afar. Ethan moved like a conductor through it all, orchestrating the rhythm of defense. He walked the grounds, memorizing angles, imagining bullets before they flew. He installed hidden cameras, sealed doors, rehearsed escape routes with brutal clarity. Claire shadowed him, tablet in hand. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a strategist, absorbing every instruction, every correction. Together they mapped the estate like a body with veins and arteries, every vulnerable point identified, every countermeasure applied. "Why do you trust me with all this?" she asked, one evening, exhaustion softening her voice. "Because you don't waste words," Ethan said. "And you see what others can't." Her eyes lingered on his longer than she should have. In them was a question she hadn't dared to ask. "And what do you see in me?" He didn't answer, not aloud, but his silence carried weight. The night before the trap, Ethan drove Lila to New Jersey, to Mrs. Chen's sister's modest home. The girl clung to his hand at the doorway, her face solemn. "Important work," he explained, crouching to meet her eyes. His chest tightened. "Just one night." She studied him with gravity far older than her years. Then she hugged him fiercely, whispering into his ear, "Be careful, Daddy. Heroes don't always come back." His throat closed. He kissed her forehead, holding her longer than he meant to. "I'll come back," he promised. He had to. Back at the estate, Daniel paced his study like a lion forced into a cage. He hated waiting, hated feeling like prey. The chandelier above glowed soft, but the air was taut as a drawn bow. Claire sat near the safe room entrance phone, ready, her posture perfect but her knuckles pale. She glanced at Ethan as he adjusted monitors. He turned toward her, his voice low, meant only for her. "When it happens, you stay in there. You don't open the door unless I give the word." She swallowed hard. "And if you don't come back," his eyes held hers steady, unyielding, "then you still don't open the door." For a moment, something broke through her mask. She reached out, fingertips brushing his hand. "Be careful," she whispered. He allowed himself a single squeeze of her fingers, an anchor, a promise, before he pulled away. At 2 a.m, the silence broke. Through the cameras, 7 figures emerged from the trees. Black clothes, rifles, hand signals smooth as language. At their center, Silas' scarred face lit by the faint gleam of moonlight. His stride was steady eyes burning with vengeance that money alone couldn't buy. Ethan's voice over the radio was calm, almost serene. "They're here." Then he moved into the dark where violence waited. The first crack of gunfire ripped through the east wing like thunder trapped in marble. Ethan pressed his back against a column, senses narrowing into pure instinct. He had built this ground to favor him, but combat never read blueprints, it lived in chaos. 2 intruders advanced in tandem rifles, sweeping boots soft against Persian rugs. Ethan waited until they crossed the threshold of shadow. Then he struck. The first man dropped from a strike to the throat weapon clattering across the tile. Ethan caught it, swung it like a club, slamming the butt into the second man's jaw. The man fell sideways into a glass cabinet, shards exploding like crystal rain. Silence for one breath. Then another voice shouted, and the house erupted again. Ethan moved, fast, always moving. The dining hall became a gauntlet. He flipped a table for cover bullets chewing into its oak surface. He returned fire, once precise, not to kill, but to buy seconds. Then he rolled low, sweeping a man's legs, finishing with a chokehold until the body went limp. The next attacker came from the kitchen, muzzle flashing. Ethan ducked, shoved a heavy door forward. It slammed into the shooter's face with a sick crunch. Blood spattered white tile. The man screamed, gun slipping from his grip. Ethan kicked it away, then silenced him with a strike that left him unconscious but breathing. 4 down. But Silas was no ordinary predator. He prowled the main foyer, scar glinting under fractured light from the chandelier. His eyes searched with lethal patience. He carried himself like a man who had been betrayed and was determined to repay betrayal in blood. When Ethan stepped into the foyer, Silas's lips twisted into something between a snarl and a grin. "You don't know what he did," Silas said, voice low, ragged with rage. "Carter ruined lives, families. He left good men with nothing." Ethan's ribs screamed as he shifted, breathing shallow against the knife wound that seeped beneath his shirt. "And you think this fixes it? This won't bring anyone back. It'll make him pay." Silas lunged. The collision was brutal. Fist against fist, elbow against bone. They crashed into furniture, toppling a heavy side table, scattering first editions across the floor. Ethan blocked, countered, ribs flaring with pain every time he twisted. Silas fought with the fury of a man already dead in his own mind. Every strike came fast, relentless, driven by grief weaponized into hate. Ethan staggered back, slamming into a column. Blood filled his mouth. He spat crimson onto marble eyes blazing. His muscles screamed, but somewhere deeper, another force stirred memory of Lila's arms around his neck, her whisper in the dark. "Be careful, Daddy. Heroes don't always come back." He couldn't die here. He had promised her. Silas swung wild, a haymaker too heavy, too desperate. Ethan slipped inside the arc, countered with precision. Left jab, right hook, knee to the gut, elbow across the temple. Silas collapsed onto marble body, shuddering once before going still. Ethan stood above him, chest heaving, body wrecked. His fists hovered for a moment, temptation whispering to end it. But he froze. He thought of his daughter's question, "Once, Daddy, have you ever killed anyone since you came home?" And he had answered no. He would not change that answer now. Silas lay unconscious, alive, and that mattered more than vengeance. The silence after was louder than the battle. Ethan's breath echoed in the cavernous foyer, mingling with the creak of the chandelier and the drip of his own blood on marble. He pressed a hand to his side, forcing his body to move. "It's done," he rasped into the radio. Code word, Firefly. A moment later, the safe room opened. Claire stepped out first, her eyes sweeping across him. She saw the blood, the bruises, the tremor he tried to hide. Her composure cracked just for a second. She rushed forward, hands already reaching for gauze and tape. "You're hurt," she whispered, her fingers brushing his. "I've had worse," he said, voice hoarse but steady. She pressed cloth against his ribs, trembling despite her practiced hands. Her head bowed close, her hair brushing his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, not just for surviving, but for not losing himself in the darkness. Behind them, Daniel Carter emerged, pale and shaken phone, still clutched, voice tight, as he reported to authorities. His eyes flicked from Silas, unconscious on the floor, to Ethan standing bloodied but unbroken. He saw the difference between them. By dawn, the estate swarmed with agents. Silas and the others were dragged away in cuffs. Evidence pointed to a conspiracy deeper than Daniel's rivals, a betrayal rooted in his own boardroom. As helicopters thumped overhead, Claire remained at Ethan's side, cleaning wounds with quiet precision. He didn't flinch under her touch, though every sting carried weight. When she finished, she leaned against him just slightly, her warmth anchoring him in the chaos. "You're not alone," she murmured. For the first time in years, he almost believed it. By sunrise, the estate looked less like a fortress and more like a crime scene museum. Evidence markers dotted the marble floors, yellow tape stretched across corridors, and shattered furniture lay piled like bones. The scent of gunpowder still lingered beneath the antiseptic tang of cleaning supplies. Federal agents swarmed in dark jackets, their clipped voices filling the air. Detainees Silas and the others were herded into vans, faces pale but defiant. Cameras flashed from the gates, reporters shouting questions into the cold morning. Ethan stood apart from the chaos, his shirt stiff with blood hands wrapped in fresh bandages. He kept his posture loose, but his eyes scanned everything, always calculating, always ready. Claire remained near him, refusing to drift too far. Every so often, her gaze slid over his injuries, cataloging silently. She saw what the others didn't, the exhaustion beneath his control, the weight pressing him down. Daniel Carter, however, had eyes only for the betrayal unveiled before him. The federal lead agent, a tall woman with gray eyes, approached Daniel in the study. "We've confirmed your suspicion. This wasn't just outside pressure. You were compromised from within." Daniel's jaw worked. "Who?" "Your head of security," she replied. "He's been selling information, access points, schedules, vulnerabilities. We picked him up at JFK an hour ago." One-way ticket cash, non-extradition country. Daniel staggered back against the desk as if someone had punched him. His security chief, a man he had trusted for a decade, shared drinks with, relied upon, had fed the wolves. Ethan spoke from the corner, voice low and steady. "Fortresses fall from the inside. You never see it until it's too late." Daniel's eyes flashed with anger, then softened. "How did you know?" Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Because I've lived it. Trust is always the first breach." The fallout was immediate. Carter Industries' board demanded statements, stock analysts spun fear into charts, and PR whispered of disaster. But Daniel made a decision that shocked even his closest advisors. He would face it publicly. Against the pleas of lawyers and executives, he called a press conference. Claire tried to dissuade him, her voice sharper than usual. "If you stand in front of cameras, they'll devour him," she said, nodding toward Ethan. "They'll turn him into spectacle. They'll dig into his past, his daughter, everything he wants hidden." Daniel rubbed his split lip, the wound still tender. "If I don't, they'll spin their own story. At least this way we tell it first." Ethan, leaning against the wall, broke his silence. "Do it. Just keep my daughter out of it." Claire turned on him. "You can't be serious. Exposure is the one thing you've fought to avoid." He gave a tired half smile. "Sometimes the only way to disappear is to step right into the light, then walk out again." The press conference drew more cameras than Daniel's most lucrative mergers. The atrium of Carter Industries buzzed with reporters, microphones stacked like weapons flashes primed to blind. Daniel stepped up, suit pressed, face set in determination. Claire hovered to the side tablet, ready, eyes darting like a sentry. "My life," Daniel began, was nearly ended twice this month. Once in a restaurant. Once in my own home. I survived because of one man. The crowd hushed. Ethan Cross. Daniel said, gesturing toward the back. Ethan shifted uneasily in a borrowed suit, standing with shoulders too broad for anonymity. He looked more soldier than civilian, more ghost than man. This man, Daniel continued, saved me not for money, not for favors. He asked only for the chance to go home to his daughter. In a world where everything is transactional, remember what it means when someone refuses to sell courage. Questions exploded. Who is he? Was he military? Will he join your staff? What's his daughter's name? But Daniel raised his hand. That's all. No more. He stepped down, ending it before the feeding frenzy could claw deeper. Ethan exhaled and slipped through a side exit, Claire following fast. Behind the building in the alley, Ethan tugged at the suffocating tie leaning against brick. Claire found him there, her heels echoing against wet pavement. You hate this, she said softly. Attention is a leash, he muttered. And I don't wear leashes. She tilted her head, studying him. Even heroes need their story told. I'm no hero, he said flatly. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper. Tell that to Daniel, to those men in the garage, to your daughter who believes you're stronger than the world. For a long moment their eyes locked. The city hummed around them, but the air between them felt like silence. Something unspoken lingered, fragile and dangerous. That evening in their queen's apartment, Lila sat cross-legged on the couch, tablet glowing. Daniel's speech replayed, his voice booming. Daddy, she whispered, he said your name. He said you saved his life. Ethan froze in the kitchen doorway, dish rag still in his hands. He told the world, you're a hero. Her eyes shone proud and afraid all at once, afraid the world might take him away now that it knew his name. He knelt, prying the tablet gently from her hands. I don't care what he said. You listen to me. His voice softened. I'm yours, only yours. She flung her arms around him, pressing her face to his chest. Promise. He held her tight, every scar aching. Promise. Meanwhile, uptown Daniel sat in his penthouse, whiskey untouched at his side. He replayed the day in his mind, the betrayal, the blood, the press conference. His empire remained intact, but his walls had never felt thinner. For the first time in decades, Daniel Carter envied a man who owned nothing. Not wealth, not power, just a daughter who looked at him like he was enough. And for the first time, Daniel wondered what belonging truly cost. The city settled back into its rhythm, but inside Ethan's world, nothing returned to normal. The restaurant let him go quietly. Too much publicity, too many reporters loitering with cameras. He didn't fight it. He only packed his locker, folding his apron with the care of a soldier folding colors, and walked out without looking back. At home, he tried to pretend life was unchanged. Breakfasts with Lila, school runs, homework at the kitchen table. But every knock at the door made his pulse spike. Every stranger's glance on the subway felt like scrutiny. The viral video had done what bullets couldn't. It made him visible. Lila noticed. Children always did. One night after he tucked her in, she whispered, You don't smile as much anymore. He kissed her forehead. I'm smiling right now, but she was right. Claire too felt the change. Meetings with Daniel grew heavier, his paranoia tightening like a noose. He barked at executives, doubled his guard, lived in fortresses of glass and chrome. She did her job, she always did, but her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan. She remembered the way his voice cracked when he spoke of Catherine, the way he'd crouched in a supermarket aisle to tie his daughter's shoe, the way he had stepped into violence like it was a language he hated but could never forget. Late at night, when the city lights looked loneliest through her windows, she opened her tablet. She had 3 photographs on her shelves, 17 books on leadership. But it was Ethan's face she saw in her mind, bloodied and unbroken in the Carter estate foyer. Daniel tried to move forward. He restructured security, fired. Half the board promised reforms. But wealth could not mend the fracture inside him. He had been spared death twice, and gratitude was a language he didn't know how to speak. Still, something softened. He began showing up to small things, a school play where Ethan sat in the back, blending into shadows. Daniel claimed coincidence that he was in the neighborhood. But everyone knew better. Ethan tolerated it at first, then accepted it. Because when Lila bounded off stage and into Daniel's arms shouting, Uncle Bernie, the name she'd chosen herself, Ethan saw what his daughter saw. Not a titan of industry, but a lonely man trying awkwardly to belong. One Saturday afternoon, Claire appeared at the apartment, not in her armor of charcoal suits, but in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose. She carried brownies in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. Lila answered the door, gasping with delight. "You came." Claire smiled, stepping inside. Ethan looked up from the stove, spatula in hand, garlic threatening to burn. He blinked, startled, then shook his head with a half smile. "You're just in time to watch me ruin dinner." They ate at the small table, laughter threading through the room. Claire helped Lila with her math homework, patient and gentle, while Ethan hovered in the kitchen, trying not to stare. Later, after Lila fell asleep on the couch, they sat on the fire escape, the city sprawled before them. Claire sipped wine, her eyes on the skyline. "She misses having a mother," Ethan said quietly, surprising himself. "She doesn't remember Catherine much, just impressions, perfume, lullabies." He paused, voice breaking. "I try, but there are things I can't be for her." Claire turned her gaze tender. "I miss having a family," she admitted. "I've been so busy being necessary I forgot about being wanted." Her words hung between them like fragile glass. He looked at her, seeing not the polished assistant, but the woman beneath. "We want you around," he said simply. "Both of us." The progression was slow. Careful. A toothbrush left behind. Work clothes folded into drawers. Pajamas she wore when Lila demanded movie nights. Ethan learned her coffee preferences. She learned the shape of his nightmares and how to bring him back without making him feel weak. Lila adjusted with the easy grace of children drawing three figures in her crayon family portraits. Sundays stretched into lazy breakfasts. Homework turned into shared lessons. Bedtime stories required all three voices. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt his heart thaw. Daniel watched from the edges, almost envious, almost grateful. He declined dinner meetings in favor of birthday parties. He clapped too loudly at school plays. He became Uncle Bernie without protest. And as he watched Ethan, Claire, and Lila form something that looked like family, he realized that power wasn't in the boardrooms he commanded. It was here in laughter over burned garlic, in a child's trust, in the quiet touch between two people who had carried too much loss and still dared to love again. The seasons turned. Winter's sharp breath softened into spring, and the rhythm of their lives began to settle into something Ethan hadn't thought possible: ordinary. Ordinary mornings with Lila rushing through cereal so she could braid her hair twice before school. Ordinary evenings where Claire's voice joined his as they read bedtime stories. Three voices weaving tales until laughter won out over sleep. Ordinary Sundays with pancakes that burned on one side and came out perfect on the other. Claire laughing as Ethan pretended not to sulk when Lila declared her stepmothers were better. Ordinary and yet miraculous. Because for a man who had once believed invisibility was survival belonging, now felt like the bravest act of all. The wedding came small as they wanted. A botanical garden, sunlight sifting through glass domes. Lila marched proudly down the aisle, flower girl and ring bearer and maid of honor, all at once. Daniel Carter. Yes. Uncle Bernie stood taller than boardrooms had ever made him as he gave Claire away. His eyes shimmered, though he blamed allergies. Mrs. Chen wept openly in the front row. Ethan wore a suit that fit him for once. His vows were simple, his voice rough. "I thought my life ended when I lost Catherine. But then I found light again. With you. With us. With her." Claire's voice trembled, but her words cut clear. "I thought being needed was enough. But you taught me what it is to be wanted. Home isn't a place. It's people. It's you. It's her." When they kissed, Lila clapped loud enough for the garden to echo. Finally, she shouted, and laughter washed through the ceremony like a blessing. The reception took place in Daniel's garden. His gift had been paying for everything despite Ethan's protests. "Consider it a business merger," Daniel joked, raising a glass. But beneath the humor was pride, the kind that doesn't come from numbers, but from watching people you love find happiness. Ethan stood back, a glass in hand, watching his daughter twirl with Claire across the lawn, both laughing, hair flying. Catherine's absence was a gentle presence beside him. Not a weight anymore, but an approval, as though she whispered permission. Be happy, without guilt. He felt her there, and for once, instead of pain, it filled him with peace. Life unfolded slowly after that, stitched together in threads of the ordinary. They moved into a larger apartment in the same building because Lila insisted Mrs. Chen was family, and family didn't get left behind. Ethan left the dish pits behind too, taking a position teaching self-defense at the community center. His scars became lessons, his knowledge a shield for others. The point isn't to fight, he told teenagers who thought violence was glory. It's to walk away standing. Claire scaled back her hours with Daniel. She shifted to consulting carving space for homework sessions, after-school snacks Friday movie nights, where she and Lila debated plot holes while Ethan pretended to understand. They built traditions without realizing it. Friday movie nights, Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday evenings with Daniel squeezed into their kitchen chair, pretending to grumble at the cramped space, even as he soaked up every moment. Lila began drawing crayon families with 4 figures, now herself, Ethan, Claire, and Uncle Bernie looming in the corner like a benevolent giant. And slowly the cracks in Ethan's armor filled. He still woke sometimes with nightmares, but Claire was there, steady hand on his chest, grounding him. He still caught himself scanning exits, but now he smiled when he realized his daughter was safe, her laughter louder than any threat. Daniel found peace, too, in his own way. He was still married to the Empire, still bound to numbers and conquests. But now when silence pressed too hard in the penthouse, he had somewhere to go. A cramped apartment that smelled of garlic and crayons where a girl shouted Uncle Bernie and dragged him into Monopoly games he always lost. Power, he realized, meant little compared to the warmth of being needed for more than what you owned. One spring evening after Lila had gone to bed, Ethan and Claire sat on the fire escape city lights flickering like distant stars. The air was cool, carrying the scent of budding trees. Claire leaned against his shoulder, voice soft. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't been at the restaurant that night?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he answered, "I don't. Because everything that matters is here now. That's enough." She smiled, eyes closing, trusting the night. And for the first time in years, Ethan believed in something he had almost forgotten forever. Summer arrived in Queens with heat that shimmered on sidewalks and laughter spilling from open windows. Ethan Cross found himself living a rhythm he once thought unreachable. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was theirs. Mornings began with Lila tugging at his arm, demanding pancakes, her hair wild and golden in the sun. Claire teased him for burning garlic, then kissed his cheek as if that flaw were proof of humanity. Evenings ended with bedtime stories told by all 3 voices overlapping until giggles carried Lila into sleep. Ethan sometimes lay awake after listening to the hush of the city. His body still carried tension scars twitching at every siren in the distance. But now when nightmares pulled him under Claire's hand would find his, and her steady presence anchored him back. Daniel Carter had changed too. Once a man defined by conquests and mergers, he now found himself at soccer fields and science fairs. He stood in bleachers clapping too loudly when Lila scored a goal. He clutched handmade programs at school plays, his suit jacket crumpled, his eyes suspiciously bright. The board whispered that their CEO was distracted. But Daniel didn't care. For the first time in decades, he had something resembling family. Not the blood he had lost, not the marriages money couldn't salvage, but the messy, beautiful warmth of belonging to someone else's table. He became Uncle Bernie without question, the corporate general turned godfather. And he was proud. One evening, Daniel arrived with a gift too extravagant to disguise a scholarship fund for Lila Papers. Neatly bound, her future secured in ways Ethan had never dared to hope. "I don't need charity," Ethan said, voice low, pride stiffening his shoulders. "This isn't charity," Daniel replied, meeting his gaze. "It's insurance. For her. For you. Because I know what it means to live with nothing but fear." For a long moment, Ethan considered refusing, but then he thought of Catherine, thought of promises made in hospital rooms and whispered to a child in the dark. Finally, he nodded once. "Thank you," he said. The words cost him, but they were true. Lila thrived under the patchwork family that had gathered around her. She chased soccer balls with Ethan's intensity, debated with Claire's precision, laughed with Catherine's echo. She drew family portraits with crayons, 4 figures, now each with arms outstretched. Herself, Ethan, Claire, and Uncle Bernie taller than the rest. Sometimes she would climb into Ethan's lap, eyes shining. "Daddy," she'd whisper, "I think Mom would like this." He swallowed hard, holding her tighter. "Yeah, bug. She would. Claire would watch quietly from the doorway, her own eyes glistening, knowing Catherine was part of their story too. That summer, Ethan began teaching self-defense at the community center full-time. He showed teenagers how to fight not to win, but to walk away safe. Strength isn't in what you can break, he told them, but in what you can protect. Parents thanked him. Students admired him. But Ethan never forgot his purpose to keep violence from being the only language they knew. At night, Claire teased him about being a teacher now. From Navy SEAL to community center coach, she'd say with a grin. He'd shrug, half smile. I like this battlefield better. And he meant it. On Lila's 9th birthday, the apartment filled with laughter. Mrs. Chen brought dumplings enough for an army. Claire baked a cake that leaned to one side but tasted perfect. Daniel arrived in a suit far too formal for balloons and party hats, but let Lila smear frosting on his cheek without complaint. When she blew out the candles, she said her wish aloud. I wish we could always be like this. The adults exchanged glances over her head, silent promises written in their eyes. Later, after the guests had gone and Lila slept surrounded by wrapping paper and stuffed animals, Ethan and Claire sat on the fire escape. The city glowed around them, stars blurred by neon. She wished for forever, Claire whispered. Ethan leaned his head back against the railing, eyes on the night sky. Then we give it to her, one day at a time. Claire turned, studying his face, her hand sliding into his. I love you, she said simply, the words steady, certain. He looked at her heart thundering and smiled. Catherine would have liked you. She would have told me to stop being an idiot and kiss you already. So he did. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cross kissed not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as a man who finally believed in second chances. Autumn came again, leaves turning copper along Queens sidewalks. The air filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts from corner carts. Time had passed, and with it the sharp edges of survival softened into rhythms of family. Lila was taller now, her stride filled with confidence. She debated fiercely at school, played soccer with fire, and still demanded bedtime stories even when she claimed she was too old. Claire became more than stepmother. She was a guide, a compass. Ethan watched them together, sometimes aching with gratitude that life had given him a second chance he thought impossible. At the community center, his classes grew. Teenagers who once sought trouble now sought his instruction. He showed them how to walk away, how to defend without destroying. He poured his past into something better, something that would outlive scars. Claire balanced consulting work with home. She was present for science projects, school trips, late-night hot chocolate. She hummed Motown when she cooked, and Ethan teased her for it, though secretly he found it the sweetest sound. And Daniel Uncle Bernie remained a constant satellite. He came to every recital, every game, carrying himself with pride that boardrooms never gave him. He was still alone in his penthouse most nights, but at their cramped kitchen table, he belonged. Years passed in this ordinary magic. Birthdays, holidays, arguments over bedtime and forgotten chores, joys stitched together with frustrations like all real families. On Lila's 18th birthday, they gathered again at the same botanical garden where Ethan and Claire had married. Friends, neighbors, Mrs. Chen with too much food. Daniel boasting to anyone who'd listen. The air glowed with strings of lights and laughter carried into the night. Ethan stood with his arm around Claire, watching their daughter laugh with friends, head thrown back fearless. We did good, Claire whispered, leaning into him. He kissed her temple voice low. We did perfect. Later after the party, the three of them sat together on the fire escape. The city hummed below, eternal and indifferent. But here in this circle of light, they were complete. Lila sprawled across their laps, her voice muzzy with sleep. Tell me the story again, she murmured. Ethan smiled. Once there was a knight who tried to disappear, but the kingdom found him anyway. Claire picked up the thread. And a clever princess who reminded him that strength wasn't in his sword, but in his heart. And a little girl, Lila whispered, her eyes drifting closed, who wished for forever. Her breathing steadied, and Ethan and Claire finished the tale in silence, their hands twined together. In the quiet after Ethan looked out over the city and understood something Catherine had once tried to teach him, that survival wasn't victory. Love was. He tightened his arms around the two women beside him, his daughter, his wife, and knew that this finally was the life he had fought for without knowing. Not just people to protect, but people to build with, to belong to. The world outside roared on. But inside their small orbit, they had won. And sometimes that was enough. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.